Welcome to F1INE Margins. I'm Bella.
And I'm Ben.
And in the same way that F1 has always been about pushing the car, the innovation, the drivers, and the team that margin further than the competition,
we aim to go that bit extra to give you the best info on anything F1 with no bullshit.
Today's episode is about the French GP, and on a very hot day in the south of France, we ended with a max win,
Ferrari had some more Ferrari moments,
a double podium for Mercedes,
and Alpine leapfrogging McLaren in the Constructors' Championship.
So let's start off with Ferrari, who I think continue their narrative of having consistent strategy and reliability issues, with Leclerc ending up in the wall and Sainz probably being 2 places behind where he should have been as an end result.
Absolutely. And obviously it's been the main point of discussion for Ferrari for the majority of this year, with consistent power unit failures, with poor strategy decision making, and Leclerc making another mistake, costing them more important points in the championship.
Yeah, so I did a bit of digging because I think everybody's being quite harsh to Ferrari, and they certainly are not the first team to have reliability issues, right? Red Bull have had their seasons with reliability issues. Renault have had their reliability issues, specifically with the Renault engine. Over the years, there's definitely been teams that have had more DNFs in a season. But I think the key thing that you can't forget is that it's not just reliability issues, it is strategy issues. And so when I was going through all the races this year, I really did want to break it down between mistakes by the driver, lack of reliability in the car, and strategy mistakes, right? So if we break it down, especially for Leclerc, Leclerc made a mistake when he spun out in Emilia-Romagna when he was chasing Perez, right? He also made a mistake today, according to him, when he put it in the wall, and nobody knows exactly what happened, but he claims that was his mistake. The car failed on him in Barcelona and Azerbaijan, and strategy let him down from the Ferrari team in Monaco and Silverstone, right? Then with Sainz, who I feel often has a conversation with his Ferrari engineers when it comes to going to the pits or anything. And I think quite clearly people can agree that there was bad strategy calls in Monaco and today. I think him being asked to go into the pits right after he had the overtake with Sergio and he was in 3rd place and there was 10 laps to go, and the tyres, although definitely not in good health, perhaps could have continued. Either that decision should have been taken before or after, because on the comms right before he did that overtake, they were like, no, we're not going into the pits. And he was like, but I want to come into the pits. Then he does the overtake, and then it's like they weren't even looking at the race, and they send him in a message saying, you need to come into the pits. And I think
the key problem for them has been it's the lack of decision making, because you could see it at Silverstone, also at Monaco, and also today with Sainz struggling with his tyres because he was doing a long stint on the mediums. They seem to take so long to get to a decision.
Yeah, they suffer from indecision, and maybe that's an organizational thing within Ferrari, right? Maybe there are too many people that are the decision makers. Maybe there aren't enough. But there's certainly something to be looked at there, because I feel like this is just such a recurrent thing that it's not even that the driver disagrees with the decision. It's that they change their decision. It's that shifting between saying one thing and then completely switching. And so I just felt bad for Sainz because, he came from back of the grid through to 3rd place, then
Absolutely.
went into the pits, came back to 9th place, and then made it all the way back to 5th place. And he.
But this poor strategy and decision making has been a problem since even the Vettel era at Ferrari. Where they had a fast car in 17 and 18, maybe not quite Mercedes level, but they were consistently plagued with poor decision making. That costed Vettel on numerous races, from winning races or finishing in the podiums. So this is something that they just haven't sorted throughout all the years.
Yeah, and it's a shame, because there's no doubt about it. Even if you look at the quali times this weekend with Sainz and Leclerc leading, they have a fast car. They have 2 very good drivers. I really think
Absolutely.
Sainz, and we'll talk about this later, has come into his own in the last few races. But they can't seem to pull it together. And then you do start feeling bad for Sainz, because then I was going through his stats, and yeah, strategy was made badly in Monaco and France, but then the car DNF'd on him in Australia, Emilia-Romagna, Azerbaijan, and Austria. So you wonder, where would Sainz be in the constructors, if these kind of things were not happening? But notably in the race, just to close off this segment, what do we mean by lack of strategy making? Well, number one, Sainz had that 5-second time penalty due to Ferrari having an unsafe release when they brought him into the pits the first time. Had that not happened, he would not have had this issue at the end of the race to have to come into the pits to do that 5-second time penalty, right? So that's like basic execution that they got wrong.
And to add to that, he had to explain to his engineer that it wasn't a 5-second stop and go. It was just a 5-second penalty that would be added at the end of the race.
Really? I didn't know that.
No, he had to explain it on the radio while driving at 300 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, we've already discussed the indecision and the timing. So then the other thing, just not necessarily due to Ferrari, but maybe more due to the Ferrari power unit, is let's talk a little bit about the retirement of K-Mag's car, so the Haas and Joe.
Well, I think we're not quite sure what the K-Mag issue is, because he started at the back of the grid because it's a complete new engine, because he has exceeded the limit. So we're not quite sure why he had to retire the car. But Joe stopped. He stopped on the middle during the race. Obviously brought out the virtual safety car. So that normally means there is something wrong with the engine, perhaps a gearbox, or perhaps something electrical. But again, it's more Ferrari-powered cars that are struggling with DNF, and this is Joe's 5th DNF of the season.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we would need to look more into the statistics of exactly why those issues are happening. Maybe it's an unfortunate correlation. I think the key thing is to note it and then see if anything comes out in coverage on it after, whether it's to do with the Ferrari powertrain or not. So second thing I think that was noticeable in this race, I think it was the first time I was really looking at Perez over the weekend, and he just didn't seem to be as on it as he usually is. So during quali, he was obviously 8 tenths behind Max on pace, and then today he was kind of struggling a little bit. The gap between him and George Russell was incrementally decreasing after Lewis passed him in the start.
Well, I mean, even at the start, he was within DRS range to Lewis. Had it, I think, just 5 tenths, 4 tenths. I think it got close to a tenth at some point. But then the gap started increasing and increasing. So, I think also perhaps Verstappen was saying this a little, that they are struggling with tyre degradation, which is also noticeable at the Austria Grand Prix.
But Sergio is known to be the man to manage tyres.
On medium tyres. He can make them last as long as he wants.
Yeah. And then I think on the restart, I think it's unfair.
Russell got him.
Yeah, it's unfair for people to say this is Sergio's issue, he was asleep. I honestly just think you're actually downplaying Russell. Russell was incredibly strategic about how he took that virtual safety car start. He purposely went slower than he needed to. So rather than speeding up and stopping, he could basically have a standing start when the virtual safety car was released. So inevitably he had more pace than Sergio, who was not static but hadn't taken the same approach. But yeah, definitely, not a bad finish for Perez. But even when Max was on the comms at the end and was like, where did Perez finish? And the engineer said 4th, he was like, oh, okay. It didn't really talk much about it, but I definitely think they expected a stronger result.
I mean, I think the Red Bull team will be, they won't be too disappointed with the results, because obviously, Verstappen won the race. But I think they will know that they could have gotten higher. They could have got better. They could have had a P1, P2, especially with both Ferrari cars, with Leclerc crashing and Sainz standing at the back, being out of the running. So they could have really, really added to that championship lead.
What's the gap between Ferrari and Red Bull in the constructors?
80 plus points right now.
Okay. So still, a good way for them to get the lead. I think another thing that I was kind of hoping was going to be a theme today, but didn't really become a theme, was when Max and Lewis found themselves side by side after the virtual safety car.
Flashbacks.
I do think people were having some flashbacks of last year's fights between the two, but obviously, as we saw in the lap times in quali, the Mercedes car is just not as fast as the Ferrari or the Red Bull, and I think unfortunately that didn't really happen.
You know, they do have much better race pace than quali pace. I think they struggled with getting the tyres in the right window. I think Toto Wolff said this after the race, and he said this several times throughout the year that they struggled to heat up the tyres enough. But that also could mean that the tyres last much longer. So you could see at the start of the race, the Red Bulls and the Ferraris were much faster at them. But as soon as it hit that 6-second gap, it kind of stabilized around there. And you know, Hamilton was setting some fast sector times. So I think the race pace is there, but they're still 6/10 down.
I think the tyre actually gives them quite good long run strategy. Exactly. It's like whenever they do a pit, whenever they start, they're slow. But because the time it gets to get into that tyre window is slower, the tyre degradation, I mean, there's so many more factors that contribute to tyre deg, but it basically means I think they can last longer and play a longer game than most other teams. I mean, they basically ran the opposite strategy as Haas, who came in, when did Haas come in? Basically within, by lap 10, both Haases had come into the pits. That was mostly to get out of the DRS train, but
get some clean air. But, you know, obviously the safety
played
car,
against them with the safety car.
Leclerc really did not help them, but it's a shame because they had good pace today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the final theme of today was the Alpine and McLaren battle in the midfield, considering they went into this Grand Prix tied in the constructors. No,
absolutely. And I think we can definitely make a prediction that there will be a Drive to Survive episode on this in the next season. But I mean, obviously Fernando had an incredible start. Getting past Norris at the start of the race. And, you know, he obviously finished above Norris and Ocon finished above Ricciardo. So they finally overtook them in the championship battle. They've consistently throughout this year have had the faster car. They've struggled with a lot of reliability issues, which is probably why McLaren has been ahead of them for so long. But, you know, even with McLaren's upgrades, and they brought 7 to this race, Alpine seem to be that much faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's jump into a little bit about the drivers that will quite stand out on the day. I think Sainz had a great race. You have to consider that he came from P19 and made it all the way through to third, albeit with the help of the safety car, but it was overtake after overtake. Some can attribute that to him having a new engine. I think he looks incredibly comfortable in this car, and I think he's a man on a mission.
I think, you know, it's not fair to say that he has been faster than Leclerc for most of this weekend. You know, I think he was faster FP2, FP3. He set a stunning lap time in Q2, you know, and obviously didn't have to do a Q3 time because we knew he was starting at the back of the grid, so he gave Leclerc a tow to get him pole, but he has been very fast, and it's a shame that, you know, the Ferrari reliability issues, especially since now they've exceeded the limit of new engines and both drivers will likely have to take another penalty at some point in the year, that it happened at this weekend when Sainz looked so on form and so on the game.
I think, yes, the gap in the points is there. I'm not really in a place to say whether he'll make that up this season. My assumption is no. I think it's more interesting to see what will happen next season with both Ferrari drivers in that same car with the way it's going now. But it's good to see Ferrari have 2 incredibly strong drivers that when it comes down to it, Sainz is really pulling those points in.
Absolutely.
I think Daniel had a good day.
Yeah, he looked much closer to Norris.
Because he was, 1/10 off him in quali?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think they'll be disappointed, obviously, in the McLaren paddock because they've lost the lead. They've lost their position over Alpine. And Daniel finishing 9th, you know, he won't be... I mean, obviously he'll be perhaps happier that he's closer to Lando, but he won't be too happy about that. I don't think either the drivers will be. But, you know, I think he's getting more comfortable in the car.
Absolutely. Then, of course, we have to give a shout out to both Mercedes drivers. Hamilton, yet again, has had quite a lonely race, just sitting comfortably in second or third last race. But he had such a strong start, capitalized on the virtual safety car, gave what he could, I think, to the fight with Max. And then, of course, you had Russell, who in so many ways can be quite similar to Hamilton in how smart he is about the way he drives and the way he works the car. And I think when he chased down Perez, once Toto Wolff came on the radio and was like, George, let it go, just drive, he did a fantastic job. I think that...
But he's for someone so young, and especially for someone who was driving in that Williams car, which was obviously not competitive at all, he just seems to have bags of experience, and the move he pulled when the virtual safety car ended, that's something you'd expect from a Fernando Alonso or a Lewis Hamilton, or someone with years of F1 experience. But he's a very talented driver.
And it's all about the fine margins.
It's all about the fine margins, baby.
Just got to plug that in. But it is, because he made that small decision. It gave him that much more pace, and that was it, right? It's just about those tiny, tiny gains. I mean, we're talking about tenths and hundreds of seconds that make the difference between winner or lose, right? And then finally, I think, once again, I don't understand what happens in Aston Martin. They just don't have quali pace.
But they have
and then on race day, they just turn up.
Pace. And it's so hard to understand because, Lance Stroll throughout this year has consistently made up, on average, over 5 spots per race. So the car's fast enough. Vettel's had some, he's had some good finishes this year. Stroll he's got 4 points, all from P10.
Yeah.
And they've all come from him starting close to the back of the grid and just making up to P10.
Yeah, I thought it was funny at the end to see the both Aston Martins battling against each other. I think they had contact, by the way, in the last corner. But yeah, Lance Stroll maintained his position. Cool. So that's basically the key themes of today's race. Nothing new, I would say, apart from maybe Mercedes having that podium finish. I think the themes are pretty consistent and have been over this season. So let's go through the grid positions from the race.
So obviously a Max Verstappen win, a double Mercedes podium with Lewis P2, George P3, Checo coming in P4, signs of a great comeback race to finish P5, Fernando Alonso P6, Norris P7, Ocon P8, Ricciardo P9, and Lance Stroll getting that final points position at P10 with his Aston Martin teammate Vettel at P11, Gasly with not a great home race at P12, Albon P13, Bottas P14, and Mick Schumacher P15 with Zhou, Latifi, Magnussen, Tsunoda, and Leclerc all DNFing.
So essentially that's the French GP. I guess things to look forward to as we move to Hungary Grand Prix.
Obviously, the battle between Red Bull and Ferrari. I think these last 3 races, Ferrari have had a faster car. They've not, it's not really translated to closing the gap because of obviously the decision making and reliability that we've mentioned. But it will be a very exciting race. And then after that, we go on to the summer break. And after the summer break, it's all the big questions. Can Mercedes really unlock the true pace of their car? Will any of the 2 championship leaders, Ferrari or Red Bull, will they find an extra 2 tenths to really, either close the gap or extend the lead?
Don't forget about the big question. Will Haas
Absolutely, the
car?
Haas upgrades are coming to Hungary. The Steinership
continues.
Baby. And they've designed a very good car. It's still competitive, even though they haven't touched it outside of setups per race. And I'm excited. I am excited. And I hope my dream is that Haas add these upgrades and they win a race or get a podium. I mean, that would break the internet for Formula 1 fans.
Absolutely. So that's the episode. If you have any suggestions of maybe where we should focus more or segments that you'd like to hear, let us know. Or if you think we're chatting absolute shit, you can also call us out for that. I think that's the last thing we want to do. So yeah, feel free to check out any of our channels, DM us, and we'll see you at the next episode for the Hungary Grand Prix.